My mouth. Hi, my name is Alexis, and this is my story. So to fully understand my journey with God and how I got to be the person I am today, I kind of have to start from the beginning. So I was born into a Methodist church. I was baptized into a Methodist church. And I always went to Sunday school. I always did mass with my parents. And I would always make arts and crafts, a little turkey, and be all like, Mom, I made this in the name of Jesus. And she'd be like, good job. So I was so proud of the fact that Jesus was real and that Jesus was a part of my life. As I got older, and as Sunday school kind of got more serious and I started going to mass with my parents, I started thinking that this was kind of pointless. I mean, obviously it's not pointless, but I felt like it was at that time. And around 8 or 9, I started seeing my biological father more often. He wasn't having any more supervised visits with me anymore, and that's when my faith with God kind of dwindled, to say the least. My father is a very hardcore non-believer of God. He low-key hates him, and he would always tell me, God isn't real. God isn't going to be there for you. God doesn't exist. And hearing that from him day in and day out, every single time I would see him and talk on the phone with him, and then be at home with my mom and grandma and the rest of my family, and they're like, Jesus is going to be there for you no matter what, even on those silly tests, like he's going to be there for you. It was hard to pick which side I was on, and it really made me think that God wasn't real half the time. Also, around this time, I started getting into more dance competitions, and I would always do competitions or conventions on a Sunday. So I never really had time to go to church. When I would do dance competitions and stuff like that, I would be so glad not to go to church, because at that point, I legitimately thought it was pointless. I hated going to church. I would always be on a bad mood on a Sunday because I had to go to church, and I hated it. And I remember distinctly one day I woke up at 8:30 and my grandma was like, Alexis, get ready for church. And I legit flat out told her no, I didn't want to go. From like ages to 8 or 9 to like 14, 15-ish, that's how I lived my life. And it kind of sucked, not gonna lie, because as more terrible things were kind of happening to me, like I got into a really toxic relationship with a boy, and my father became more mentally and emotionally abusive towards me. I felt like I didn't have support at all. Once I finally decided to cut my father out of my life and my boyfriend dumped me, which honestly was the best decision he could have ever made, I fell into a downward spiral of anxiety and depression, to the point where I was having suicidal thoughts. Not gonna lie, like I was thinking of ways to kill myself. And it just was a really dark period, and I felt like no one was there for me. My mom reached out to me. I eventually got therapy. I'm okay now, I promise. I did get therapy, and I finally kind of got my mind straight. And then I always thought, at that point, I was like mentally sane, but I felt like there was always something missing, and I never really understood why. And freshman year of high school, I started going to the downward spiral again, hanging out with the bad crowd, almost doing drugs, and all that high school stuff. And then COVID hit hard. Quarantine happened, and my church closed down for this time being because obviously the pandemic, and my church mainly consisted of old people, so they were very much at risk. So I would not really go to church. If anything, I would watch church on TV, but like I would never like feel emotionally connected to it, you know? And then June of 2020, my grandmother got COVID. Me and her actually got COVID at the same time, but mine was like hidden by like a sinus infection where I couldn't taste anything. And I've had sinus infections before where I could taste, so that was an obvious sign. And my grandma was cooped up in her room and her life was in danger. And I got so scared that she was going to die. I used to sit in front of her door because our rooms are across from each other. And I would always talk to her. Be like, Grandma, are you okay? She's like, I'm okay, I'm breathing fine, And then a week later, I got better. My grandma didn't. COVID attacked her heart, and she was forced to be sent to the hospital. Around this time, my mother also got COVID, along with my stepfather. And obviously, and surprise, surprise, during this 2-week period of depressiveness that like COVID attacked my family, dance was out of commission because we went back in person for the summer. And then it stopped for 2 weeks, ironically during the worst period of my life. And dance is my escape. And I was not having it. I was not doing Zoom classes in dance. I would barely leave my room because my 2 emotional supports were gone. I couldn't visit my mom because she had COVID. I couldn't see my grandma because obviously she was in the hospital with COVID that was severely attacking her heart, and I couldn't do anything. That entire week where I had no one to go to, I went to God, someone who I haven't talked to or believed in years. And I seriously prayed. I would cry every single night to make sure my grandma got out alive from the hospital. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. I cried, I prayed, I slept, and continued this vicious cycle. I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't drink. I would just pray, sleep, and cry. It was a horrible cycle, obviously, but it's what I did. And that Monday, 2 weeks after my grandma got COVID, she was released from the hospital with a pacemaker to help her heart, obviously. And that was the first miracle of God I've ever seen in my entire life. I was speechless at that point. I was like, oh my God, he's actually real, And I was like, ugh. I'm still a little eerie on that, But then my grandma made a promise to him while she was in the hospital to take me to a Bible-based church because she could obviously tell that Jesus was slipping more than it usually was. But little did she know, faith kind of came back, but not too much. But that miracle obviously gave me hope. And my grandma looked into Bible-based churches. I didn't like any of them. We went to several. I went to some from my friends' youth group. I went to a couple others that my grandma found. I didn't like them at all. They just weren't the thing for me, Around August, when my sophomore year of high school started, I found a remnant. And for some reason, it stuck. And I would go every Saturday because it just fell perfectly with my dance schedule, unlike the other youth groups and other churches. It just fit nicely in its little corner of my world. I would go all the time, and I would go every week, and I really liked it. I liked what Scott preached. I liked whoever was preaching. Obviously, it was mainly Scott or like Jason or Jamin. Did you preach one, Jamin? Yeah, Jamin also preached. So I liked all their sermons. They kind of just like hit me in a different area of my soul, But there was this one specific time at church, at specifically youth group, I got saved. I don't remember what Scott's teaching was about whatsoever, but I remember like specifically one thing he said. For context, my grandmother from my adoptive grandmother, my dad's adoptive mom, washed her hands of me. She wanted nothing to do with me. I waited 2 years to tell her what actually happened to me with my father, and she said, I don't believe you. And I knew it was going to happen, but it still kind of hurt, And then my dad, for the first time in 2 years, basically texted me and he said, I don't want anything to do with you. So essentially the two things I knew from my dad's family, my father and my grandmother, didn't want anything to do with me. And it broke me harder than it should have, but it broke me. Obviously, I was stronger than I was 2 years ago when the whole situation happened, but it still broke. It still hurt. And I went to church that day and I was on the brink of tears the entire night. And I remember something that Scott said. It like, his teaching was something about parental units that were very abusive and how that like wasn't right and wasn't godly. And I remember sitting there and just, his words were just hitting me in my gut. And I sobbed, quietly, obviously, because I didn't want to disrupt anyone, but I was sobbing my entire eyes out. And he always does this thing where he's like, if you haven't given your life to Christ or you've fallen away from him, please raise your hand. I raised my hand, and I remember when I raised my hand, a huge weight that I didn't know was there for years released, and it was gone. And I cried even harder. I'm a very emotional person, guys. But that weight that I've held for so many years just went away. Just like that, the moment I raised my hand. And I felt so much relief. It was crazy. After that, I decided, I think Remnant's gonna be my forever place until I decide to move out of Arizona. Since the day I've gotten saved, I've reached out to a lot of the pastors here and tried to become close with them, even though I was still very antisocial. But I tried to reach out to them as much as I could, as much as I felt comfortable with, at least. And then more people from the youth group came out and talked to me, because obviously I reached out to them and started talking to them, and I started getting invited to parties, like birthday parties and events at the youth group and videos on this channel. And I started taking notes on the Bible, which I never have done my entire life. I never took notes. And now I have a little light blue notebook that's currently sitting in my room for this Saturday, or whatever Saturday I go. And anytime I'm at a dance competition, I always go on the live stream on this channel and watch, because I feel weird not going. And if I don't make it on a Saturday and I didn't watch the live stream, I always try to make it on a Sunday. And my life has honestly been in a better place since I've got saved, and it's crazy. Now, obviously, I think God is real. God's the real MVP, guys. But he's real, and that's something that I haven't believed in honestly, God knows how long. And now I'm going to youth summer camp this year, which I have never done. I have made church friends that actually like me for the first time. I'm getting more involved in my church, and my grandma has actually noticed a difference in me. So has my mom. They're both like, what happened to you? And I'm like, I just decided that this should be it, you know? Like, now that I think about it, God's always been there. It's just I was too naive and too stubborn to realize it. And now that I have realized it, there are so many things good that are going for me. And I am honestly so glad I found Remnant, and I found the church that corresponds with it. And I'm so glad to have met these people, because honestly, I don't know where I would be without them. And yeah, that's my story.